Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, evening, morning.
Hello.
You're back in the office today, Thomas.
Yes, today and yesterday I was in the office, yes.
Is Eloise coming today?
I'm sorry.
Do we have any of our chairs today?
Yes, I think Eloise will join us, yes.
Hey, Tracy, I like your background.
Well, thanks. I was looking up and I was like, where am I? It was weird. My camera had apparently fallen off of the top of my screen over the night, and I'm like, how come I'm not in the picture? I guess I had a blonde moment. I was like,
It happened. I
wait.
do the same thing all the time. Like, I get paranoid that my camera's looking at me, so I turn it up. And then when I join a meeting, I'm wondering why it's looking at either my chin or the ceiling.
Well, the weird part was the background was there, right? But I wasn't in it. It was like, wow, I'm a ghost.
You remind me of the of Eurovision. One of the the acts have like the green screen in the background and stuff.
Yeah, I'm easily amused as well. So I was cracking up. It was like, oh, I am totally easily amused. I can make myself laugh for the silliest things.
It's a good skill to have, especially these days.
No kidding. So, hey, hi guys.
Hello.
Yeah, so we were just saying Alois should be joining soon, but I don't know where he is.
Yes, I've pinged Alois now. Otherwise, I think we can start with the app enablement charter in about 3 to 4 minutes.
Yeah, it shouldn't take too long. Do you want me to go through it on my screen, or do you want to share it, Thomas?
Eloise is already here.
Hello, everyone. Sorry, I had the wrong meeting ID here.
Hello.
Hello, hello.
Hey, afternoon.
All right, as always, same procedure. Please add yourself to our participant list. And I'll open up the agenda doc. Yeah, I mean, for today, we have two topics here, the operator white paper, and then the bigger part will be the application enablement charter refinement work. So I'd suggest we turn the agenda actually upside down, if you don't mind, because I think we're quicker with the operator white paper and then take the rest of the meeting on the application enablement part. And I'll just bring up a Also a quick note from, because we have Uma here as well, from yesterday's TUC meeting for the people who did not join. So I also presented that we're working on the Chaos white paper already with the network Chaos people. Right after that, people from the security SIG reached out as well, and Liz's proposal was that we create a working group across the 3 tags. I think it's quite unique that you have 3 tags inside the CNCF working on one deliverable. So Uma, you're about to get like super famous within the CNCF right now. But it obviously makes sense. That's also why I invited a couple of other people. I invited Lee, who's for tech security and tech network. I think he was already there, and then the security related people as well, and then reach out wider. But the feedback was very positive on the Chaos engineering white paper. And if you remember when we had this discussion back then about security chaos, also people had a funny interpretation. They were missing security chaos with security chaos or chaotic security. So we're talking about the deliberate chaos here. I think that's really great. We should just try to get that working group charter done as well. I think it's good input here also, looking at the charter for app delivery and then doing it there as well. So it was Liz's proposal, and I think if we could get this ramped up in the next month, we should be doing this. And we are going to now officially retire air-gapped environments, because we have honestly nobody really working on it. And it's just on the calendar. I'll just officially retire it. I also mentioned this yesterday. Unless anybody steps up and says, yes, this is something I want to work on, and I know 25 people who want to work on it as well. It was from the telco folks initially when we discussed it at KubeCon. It was super important, but we never really gained traction. And I think we could still start it over if we wanted to, but for the time being, I would retire it. Okay, that's just updates from my side. With this, I pass on about the operator white paper, and then let's jump into app enablement directly.
Okay, so yes, we have some really exciting news from the operator white paper side. So yesterday we kicked off the public comment phase for our white paper. I think the operator working group started around 1.5 years to write this white paper, and I think it's a pretty nice piece of paper if you print it out. And if someone of you would like to review it, find out if there's something really wrong in there and so on, feel free to read it. I've posted the link in the agenda document. And also, it would be nice if you comment on our pull request, approve it, and so on. We need as many contributions as possible in this phase, to know that everything we wrote there is correct and everyone is okay with this. Yes, and I hope every one of you enjoys this. The public comment phase will stay open until the 15th of June, I think. So this is around 2 weeks from now. And after that, we will go into a publishing phase. So we will get this published finally, hopefully. Some questions regarding the white paper now.
So the white paper is, you've published it, it's in Git. Where do I find it to look at it?
Yes, it's in Git. I'll also post the link in the chat here.
Oh, that would be so kind of you.
We have
Awesome.
posted the
Thanks.
agenda as well, so the PR.
Thank you.
So this is the direct link to the document, and I've also posted the PR to the agenda, which is almost the same. I think for the next white paper needs some support from the GitOps working group, because our Git workflow is not really perfect at the moment, but we plan to be better in the next white papers. Yes, but
yeah, but to be also totally fair, I worked in W3C standards, Git based. Git is not built for collaborative document editing. It's
Yes.
it's usually a nightmare because you get the change sets are just massive. Also, you change minor things. Yeah, I think you posted it also on the TSC mailing list, right?
No, on the app delivery mailing list, but I can post it also on the TOC mailing list if it's okay for you.
I would post it there, yeah.
And I also saw that the tech security posted it in their mailing list. So yes, it gets distributed.
Yeah. And I can also put it into the contributor one. So we should just see that we get a couple more eyes on it.
Yes, it would be pretty promising.
Yeah, it's great that this finally moves in the direction where it is supposed to be. 2 years in the making. I forgot about one thing actually, what we sometimes do here, and I see a couple of new people here. So if you want to briefly introduce yourself, obviously feel free to do so. We didn't do this in the very beginning. My bad. So if you want to, feel free to do so.
I can introduce myself real quick. My name is Josh Gavant. I work on cloud infrastructure at Discover Financial in Chicago. Previously worked in some open source projects in the past, but we're trying to improve. In particular, what got my attention was the Thomas's work on the app enablement and the infra and app coordination, which is an issue that we're working on. So hoping to be able to contribute, and nice to meet you all.
Nice to have you here.
So can I, Thomas, I have a question.
Yes.
On your white paper. So I'm so sorry. I just joined this group, I don't know, about 6 weeks ago, and I haven't been in part of this discussion. When you're for this operator paper, can you give me an idea? Is this a high level operator? This is something that goes beyond like a GitOps operator. Could this operator be used, for example, to define a pipeline, for example? Does it have do we have a bounded context in this term operator that we're using?
I think yes, you can use an operator as a pattern for using CI things. I think also I think Tecton uses operators, doesn't it?
Yep.
Just to add to Thomas's comment there, like part of the document is outlining the taxonomy of words and the domain of an operator. And so to your point, Tracy, definitively inside the context of that document, we talk about, what is the scope of an operator? Is it just a set of user activities that are mapped into a machine context, or is there something more, And so I think that precisely what you're asking, there's some good clarification within that document. And Omar and Thomas and Jennifer have done a lot of work on that.
Great. Looking forward to reading it and getting my head wrapped around it. I always like to try to cross-pollinate between what teams are doing. And on the CDF side, we have the events SIG. And I've always seems like we should have events and an operator. In other words, the events team are we going to have a listener? And is a listener an operator, right? And it could potentially be an operator could be well, let's put it this way: a listener could be a kind of an operator.
Yes, could be. Yes.
I think at some point it would also make sense for this round to talk about the event 6 standardization that's done in the CDF. So in yesterday's meeting, it goes a bit beyond the agenda here. We defined the first proof of concept where we're actually linking a CD Foundation and a CNCF project together to talk to each other using standardized events. At least we defined what we want to do. We haven't built it, obviously, in 60 minutes. But this is some work, and that I also want to see demoed here, and also then obviously over there maybe bringing both groups together. I think it is something we should consider for a future meeting, because the work has some overlap. I think some of the, especially the event payload definitions, are pretty close to what you would usually, what you might want to put in a CRD in a Kubernetes environment.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking as well. So I would encourage all of you, if you could come to the CD Foundation's having their conference June 23rd and 24th, and there will be a Birds of a Feather for the events in the event SIG. It would be a good place for you guys to come, and it gives us 30 minutes just to introduce ourselves and maybe share some concepts. I know that there is some cross-pollinating because I'm here, and so but it would be great to have a broader conversation around this. And I'll be sure and sit and share this white paper with the events team.
Would also be perfectly fine. Yes, thank you.
Okay, thanks. And yeah, I think it's good that the teams are working together here. So now let's get to the fun part, app enablement, charter refinement. I can already see how eager Alex is to get started on all
Oh,
the
yeah.
work which we have to do.
let me share my screen.
You posted today that you run out of
I ran out of steam. I ran out of steam.
MacBook runs out of power.
I ran out of steam at 11 a.m. this morning. Can you all see my screen? I hope.
Yeah,
we can.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I don't know how you wish to do this. I'm happy to do a quick 5-minute walkthrough, or we can just start analyzing each segment. What's your preference here?
I think we discussed it already high level, so let's ask
Okay.
people who still want to do it high level, because otherwise it would really jump into the comments and how we can incorporate these.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just bring it up to editing. Yeah, so fundamentally, last meeting we presented this, and there was some really useful feedback on the document itself, and we've tried to incorporate as much of that as possible. And just within this segment here, one of the big pieces that I think is probably worth reviewing and having a bit more discussion around is the problem statement of app enablement is quite nascent. And so we wanted to make it clear through real world examples, what are things that are problems when you are trying to deal with infrastructure in one hand and workloads in the other, and mesh those together in a single coherent pipeline or deployment, right? And so let me just iterate through the examples that I have, and maybe I can break that out for some questions and some suggestions. So first and foremost, the original example was a single journey of an engineer trying to deploy some sort of storage class. We've simplified this for being consumed by folks in the TOC and the general public. And we now have 3 very, very simple examples. A developer using a storage class locally to test an application, not available in a higher environment. So displaying that delta of underlying infrastructure where a workload depends on it. Deployment of an application workload is a separate approval process and journey as to deploying an ingress or some other component in infrastructure. And so when I think of people in banks who have to use ServiceNow and other tooling for risk analysis, that creates a disharmony in the way that we're actually working. And thirdly, delivering complex microservice architecture and sustainable GitOps deployment patterns are treated as separate but related, in the sense that I can't very easily express deploying my Argo CD or Flux infrastructure under my microservice architecture. It's kind of an assumption that one is there before the other. And so we want to sort of analyze some of the real world examples around this, but more especially, I wanted to just give these as initial examples as to why we feel application enablement has a place in understanding that the bounded context of these problems and how we can solution them and what people are doing. I'll just stop there to invite any questions. Okay. Thomas, do you have anything to add on this? Because it was your example I was riffing on here.
No, I have a lot of new examples for that. So especially Great. When it comes to IAM roles in AWS, when you use EKS, such EKS pods are equally, and you need IAM roles for distinct features. And this, yes, it totally makes sense to discuss exactly these topics around. You have kind of a separation between, let's say, development and operations, even if it should not exist. And they have different, let's say, life cycles or approval processes and so on, and they have to be they have to fit together at some point. And I think it totally makes sense that we think about it and try to find solutions for that.
Yeah, and I think sorry, go ahead.
No, I was about to say that when I saw the two stacks, one side the configuration, the other side GitOps or CI/CD, I didn't spend a lot of time on this, Alex, so maybe I should be doing. But I also think there may be an opportunity to bring in how do you test right before you do it or after you deploy it. So there is probably an element of chaos engineering. We are seeing a lot of attention is coming from the development point of view also. Right? A lot of our project users are actually developers against the SREs. It's still evolving in my opinion, but I think there may be a place to get in some kind of chaos engineering into this as well.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, because we are looking at these examples as if they're idempotent and as if they are atomic, right? One thing begets the state of another. Where actually in reality, we are doing a lot of battering against them, whether that's running twist lock over our images, whether that's scanning the Terraform configuration files. There's a lot of nuanced and not so clear behavior that happens in everyday pipelines and scenarios. And to Tracy's point around cross-pollination, application enablement is not just running through a Jenkins pipeline, and it's not just running through Terraform for infrastructure. It is about the I suppose the two sides of that process to enable workloads to actually deliver their job. And I think your point around where does chaos testing and where does that part of the landscape fit in is really worth talking about. And that should actually be, as I'll talk about in a moment, a bit later on in our end user studies, because I think a large part of how we're going to be successful here is by actually accurately mapping what's currently in the current landscape. Because as you said, it is sort of an emergent field, and there are many different flavors, whether that is an Argo Flux kind of situation with various chaos testing tools on top of it. So yes, to your point, I will add that actually in as something to put in for our user questioning later on.
Great.
Hi, Alex. I want to add one more example. This is Hong Chao from
Please do.
Alibaba. Yeah, one scenario we have seen in the cloud among many developers is how you can do automatic service binding. So basically, like user just provision some database or Redis, those kind of data services, and they want to automatically bind them to their applications so that they can they get the connection streams, the credentials on the wider environment variable or files.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is a very common scenario.
That's an extremely good example. It's pertinent because we have some projects like the Kubernetes service catalog. We have Thomas and I were also running a few experiments into sort of metadata being injected into environments. And so I think that there are people from different companies who are trying to solve this in various ways. And what we're seeing is a pattern of behavior in that there is no completely automated, ubiquitous solution. At least there is not one that has gained a lot of traction. So yeah, that's a great example. Thank you for participating with that. Okay, so I'll continue if we're good on the examples.
Yeah, I just had like one more that Thomas and I also discussed this week, which I find quite interesting also as a starting point, that even certain things that exist in the Kubernetes ecosystem are not used in the real world. And for me, cluster,
like the service catalog.
Maybe service catalog, but even cluster API. Tell me any managed service where I can use cluster API to create my cluster. It's only for self-hosted, so I cannot script, okay, this is the cluster that I want using cluster API, because I can't do it on, I don't know for Alibaba, but I know that for most cloud providers, I simply can't use cluster API. I can use it for my development environment with like a case where yes, I can use it, but not for larger scale deployments. And this is, for example, also a problem that we have when we have to create manage thousands of clusters on different infrastructure. This is a total nightmare.
How would you frame that? Would you call that an example? Would you call that sort of a common problem that folks have to solve for? Like,
it's a placement. So, like for example, there's some open source project called Open Cluster Management, and also like there's another project from Huawei called Kamada. like they also target this kind of like multi-cluster placement thing. They call it like placement problem.
Okay. So is what perhaps you're saying from both of you, is I'm hearing that still that multi-cluster management with then the application layer and workloads on top of it still isn't a solved problem. Like there are still many complexities there.
Yeah.
Or cloud agnostic management of Kubernetes clusters. I think that's what it also eventually boils down to.
Okay.
And then the cluster placement. I think because this is for me obvious, there is an API, but you can't use it.
Yeah.
And
I'm trying to.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I'm trying to, in every example, think of not just infrastructure, trying to combine the infrastructure with the application workload, because I feel like it helps to emphasize the point of the direction of the working group in that it is definitely about the complexities of the infrastructure, but then also imagine you have to deploy a cluster, then you have to deploy your pipelining tools on top of it. So whether that's GitLab runners, Jenkins runners, etc., then you have to have an additional step, and that's probably not managed by the same team. So you could almost paraphrase that to say that the auto enrollment of new provisioned infrastructure to deploy application workloads has a multi-step process, right? And that we've still not a solved problem.
Yeah, I just had an idea how we could call this working group except application.
Go on then. What's your suggestion? I'll go back.
No, I don't want to steal your thunder. I can keep it to the end and just put it in there.
Well, we have a whole list at the bottom, so if you can scroll to the bottom.
That's why I'm just adding it. Wow.
Okay. Okay. So that's our examples, and if you haven't kind of sort of thought about it by now, really a lot of the emphasis of this group is to look at the current cloud native tooling, the current cloud native, I would call it workflow and application enablement tools, such as CI/CD, and how they combine together. And as we were just saying there, the name of this working group may well change, but we're identifying within this event, an overlap between the two of them. Maybe this is worth having a little bit of time spent on, because it's clear to me what this diagram means, but I want to know if it's clear to other people. If there are questions, then let's redesign it. If there's things that aren't clear, then maybe let's restructure it in a way. But the idea is that this shows that kind of overlap between infrastructure tooling and sort of more traditional CI/CD and GitOps paradigm tooling for application delivery. And Thomas, again, any thoughts from you? Anything you wanted to put to the group?
Maybe there's a layer there of app build tools, like the corresponding thing from Crossplane, Pulumi, Ansible, Terraform is, I guess, what, Gradle, Cargo, Go, the compilers. And it's kind of coordinating those app compilers with the infra stuff, Crossplane, Pulumi, Ansible. We're trying to combine those in, I guess, Argo or Flux, like Argo or, one of those would coordinate something like that. So yeah, so I guess I'm saying maybe there's a third circle that we reflect here, the app packaging tools.
That sounds really good, Josh. I'm going to put your name to that just so I can make sure to follow up.
Thanks.
Not to chase you, but to follow up. I think it's also like a really succinct point, and it's also come at a really interesting inflection point in that people are really trying to analyze the value add of some of the higher order tooling and GitOps paradigm tooling. And I think they're trying to figure out how they can get that into their workflow. How do you make Pulumi work with Argo CD? How do you deploy stateful infrastructure with a tool that actually is essentially a reconcile loop that runs through a GitOps paradigm? Like all the different cornucopia of flavors people are using in the wild. I've seen people using Keptin with Ansible, with Spinnaker, with Crossplane, etc. And I'm sure that what you were just saying there around representation of a third potential build tooling and compiling section is going to be relevant for some people, definitely. Okay, any more on that? Okay, well, with that said, the next section was where a lot of folks wanted to make sure there was fair representation of projects, and I think that is another thing I want to do today. Is I don't want to put too much weight on Crossplane and Terraform. There are plenty of other real world deployment tools, whether that's Salt Stack, whether that's Chef and Puppet and other things like that. So if you just have a look and maybe please add any suggestions of things you think would be really valuable and have perhaps quite opinionated paradigms that we can add in here, and also that you maybe have colleagues that are using, because all of these need to really be backed up by us doing user studies and being able to go and talk to folks about how they're using them. I don't actually actively know anybody who's using Pulumi, so it would be, I think one of the tasks later on in this document is we're going to try and build up some question banks before we go and try and find our user base and contributors.
If you need that, then I have clients running Pulumi.
Oh,
so I,
excellent.
Bring that on. One of the comments I put in there was maybe to think about like the data model in terms of kind of figuring out what the boundary of what you're considering application enablement is. Like there was a discussion around clusters, for example. And so like, I agree that there's some part of, clusters should be represented in terms of a deployment, but a deep model around defining clusters might not be part of the data model for what you want to represent. And so that might help frame your problem in terms of kind of what is it that you want to do. Another comment I think around this infrastructure piece is more the pattern. Like for example, like you talked about crossplane, but it has this concept of a claim and a resource. And so that might be, the pattern might be more important than the stacks themselves in terms of separating the concerns around application enablement. For example, like all your applications might need to do would be just to declare the type of database they need, and the actual fulfilling of it might be some other concern, right? Anyway, so I think those might be important to capture here in terms of what you would call application enablement.
I think that's a really, really well articulated point. I was just thinking of where to best put this in the document. Yeah, and perhaps even in the problem statement is a good place as you had it. Yeah, thank you for contributing that. I think also like your points around the data model is so important because we think about the control path and the data path as really good representations of how we want to model the patterns. So I think perhaps that's something that we could have as part of our problem statement is identifying those boundaries and identifying where that data path is. Is that a fair way of serializing what you're saying?
Yeah, I think so. And we might have some work to be able to help you contribute because we've been working on this at my company, and so we have some work on the data model that we could contribute. So
that would be greatly appreciated. Okay, that's fantastic. Thank you so much.
I think it's a good point to have the non-goals in there. I'm not sure whether we have a non-goal session, and I think I'm flexible. We assume, or yeah, and we can put in that. Do we assume that the cluster is just there and we don't care how we got to the cluster, which is I think also fair. Also, where do we start? Do we care how images are built, or don't we care how images are built?
Okay, that's a very good point.
Just as a question, I'm not saying this should be the non-goal or in the goal section, but usually we're not talking about this, or we're talking about it at a later point in time might be helpful.
That's a really good shout. We should come to this section because actually, I think we have to come to a lowest common denominator. I think we're all kind of in agreement, just looking at the cloud native landscape, and there's probably going to be an agreement that there needs to be a certain level of baseline infrastructure. So either it's going to be a cloud provider or some equivocal provisionable local provider on hypervisor, like a VMware kind of thing. So good point. Let's get to that in a minute. I'll just make sure to hold that thought in my head. Just finishing up here then. So we had some good discourse about the actual the charter's problem statement itself in terms of like considering the data path and the data model as one of the aspects or the facets of what we're looking at here. Does anybody have any more opinions? I think there's a few things that have been added onto this document around known solutions for deployment. This isn't exhaustive, obviously, and it's not a panacea to say that anything on this list is any sort of preference. It's just typically what folks from the group have participated with. So please, if there are more things you'd like to add that you've seen and used, and again, to emphasize, these need to be things that we can actually potentially interview folks about and ask their experiences and how they've combined them with infrastructure pipelines as well.
I would like to add, so the problem I'm having with this category, so I'd like to add Ortelius on there, But Ortelius would call something like Argo, or it could call something like Kepton, because what Ortelius is doing is it's pushing the deployment, but it's doing all the configuration management to track the pieces and parts.
Yeah, that's perfect. I think that's perfectly fine. And actually, you know, I wonder if it's too naive breaking it down into two categories, but I think that the problem with is if we get too fine grained, then the working group becomes confusing. And I think as we're trying to invite as many people to participate as possible, simply saying it's either going to be an application deployment or a workload enablement tool or an infrastructure tool helps people, you know, cognitively just to bucket that. So I'm super okay with adding Ortelius. I remember this, you know, that's a graduated CDF project, isn't it?
No, Ortelius is an incubating project in the CDF.
Oh, incubating.
We haven't
Sorry,
graduated
incubating.
yet, but we are incubating there yet.
Yeah, I love the logo.
Thank you. You know, the thing is that anytime I see, you know, I see these lists, if I looked at any one, all of these are very different. Like Kepton is completely different from Argo, right? Kepton could probably push push to a GitOps operator and be integrating with Argo. So it's always terms and vocabulary that messes us up.
Absolutely.
So yeah, and we really are talking, I mean, most of what we have just had a discussion around is really what I would call more traditional configuration management. That's really what we're trying to get our arms around. And what do you call a package, which is an application? And how do you pull all those pieces together? It may not necessarily be doing the lift. Argo doesn't solve a lot of those things. Flux doesn't, Spinnaker doesn't. It may do the lift, but it requires, I guess it takes a village is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think also like this is going to be a good a time as any just to sort of take a step back and think about this. We're not trying to king make here. And at the same time, we're not trying to create a 15th standard, you know, like we're not trying to create another meta spec. We'll go on to actually probably the next section. Let's go to the next section now. But in the goals, really what we want to identify in this working group is how are people using the landscape? If you imagine it as kind of like a cat's cradle of, you know, intersecting lines and points of entry, it's just, we're starting to see a lot of trends in what tooling is enabling workloads and how it's enabling workloads and some of the pain points. And I think there's a real value in that as a new engineer might come into the domain and look for a white paper or examples like with Potato Head and want to see how to use Ortelius or want to see how to use Kepton or want to see how to use Pulumi, for example. So I think there is definitely, yeah, but you're right. Like it's a broad subject. If you can make it very broad very quick. Is what I'm saying. So I'm trying to keep it quite focused.
I get that, and I was going to bring you know, I think the discussion around the data side, and the more that we see customers starting to create poly databases, the more the database becomes part of the deployment puzzle.
That's a really well put point. I would love to capture that. Let me just write that down. I'm just gonna put it somewhere.
It might be. I was thinking that when we were looking at the examples before, like in my case, like buckets and databases are the first things that people like, where's my bucket that I was kind of, where's my database? That might be an easy example to get people on board first.
Tracy, sorry, Josh. Tracy, was it you said poly-tenant architecture or poly database?
Poly databases are becoming more of the deployment puzzle as we move away from a mono database and a microservice architecture. When you have if you have 15 or 20 microservice, which is a start, and you have 15 and 20 databases that go with it, you tend to want to start thinking about the databases being part of the deployment and less a task that a DBA does in the back room.
I'm smiling because I work at a cloud computing company that builds tenant architecture, and literally we're using KubeDB to build out poly databases for tenants right this moment. So I can totally sympathize with that concern. Okay. Any more thought? So go on.
Yeah. I don't know if this has been covered, but like Helm comes to mind, obviously, has been kind of important in this space. I'm not sure which category it necessarily fits in, or if it does. But even if it doesn't, it might make sense to call out why it doesn't.
That's a really good point. Yeah, so Helm, I think, comes back to the traditional configuration management of actually pushing YAML into the API server, right? So I'm trying to think of, if I was to bucket it into one of these two things, it doesn't deploy a workload. So it doesn't help in the sense that it doesn't build the workload, right? It doesn't create the image. it just tells the Kubernetes cluster to perform an activity, and it doesn't actually build any infrastructure. Like, it doesn't talk to the ESX hypervisor and create a new VM. It doesn't spin up anything. So we could put it in here, but I think that it's actually one of those potential gray areas where it's not clearly defined as one or the other. Anyone else want to chime in on that? I mean, as I said, if you put Helm in, you want to customize in as well.
Yeah, I was about to say that I think you kind of nail it there, because things like Flux, for instance, use Helm to deploy things, but that in itself is just a mean to get the job done. It was same with Customize.
It's gonna do it's doing the lift, right? It's like doing
but
the
it's
copy.
It's instantiate. Now my Norwegian starts jumping into this, but it's kind of like initiates. The tool we're talking about initiates Helm. Helm itself is just, like I said, like a means to an end type thing.
I think the reason it gets gray is because Flux, if you're using Helm with Flux, you're actually using Helm operator. And then what is Flux and what is Helm operator? I think there's some gray there.
But you know what? Let's not try and define it right now. I'm going to call it out as a comment, because I think you're right. We should have an opinion on it, right? Or at least have some words to say about it. It does seem like there's some differentiation in opinion, and that's healthy. So let's just call it out. So I'll put Helm, Customize, and other related tooling hasn't been identified. And I think maybe we should put a little sentence or two in the document why.
Maybe one comment from my side, because we did this in the past, also in the beginning with the operator white paper, looking at individual solutions. There it was even narrower. But I think we should rather look at functionalities across the application lifecycle or a task rather than projects, because many projects are doing multiple things. I think just listing projects that are kind of related in a very abstract way, I think, is helpful, but that deep discussion might lead you somewhere, because somebody could argue Helm also provides package management, so I can model my entire package dependencies in Helm, and as I can use basically CRDs or any Kubernetes YAML in there, I can model my database also as part of my Helm package, which is technically not wrong. So I think that it's rather easier which functionality you want, like service discovery, service mapping, and then different tools can provide it. But with tools, you will see that they do certain things and other things as well, and they're very hard to categorize. That's also where I remember when we did this app delivery model that Harry back then started. Why it was so hard to put a tool into an individual bucket, because many tools fit into multiple buckets all the time. And that's why it's sometimes easier to talk about, let's call them capabilities or whatever you want them to be.
Yeah, so are you suggesting that we perhaps rewrite this section to talk about examples of behaviors of these deployment applications versus deployment infrastructure?
What do you want to, what we want to build, and then we can just list, okay, these are all tools that are kind of related or applicable in this field without being like super specific.
Okay, I think that's a really good point. So I will go away and actually work with the team on that, because I think like that might be a better way. Change the heading to talk about, change the heading to perhaps say something like deployment infrastructure tools typically exhibit these types of behaviors, you know, ability to spin up from an underlying infrastructure resource, XYZ, and then we can list out, these are some of those examples. And perhaps that would help to answer the question around why aren't we showing things like Helm and stuff like that? Because it's a set of behaviors that we're really talking about. And also one final point, this isn't a panacea of all the tooling, it's just a set of exemplars, right? So if you think that, if you feel strongly enough that one of these is a really good exemplar for a unique pattern or a unique opinionated way of doing things, then it should be on this list. And in tooling like Helm and Customize, they do have some really interesting and some features that are very powerful, but they are both solving a similar problem domain.
Yeah, sorry. I just to add that before I shut up. I would kind of put Helm and Customize and those kind of things very closely to being like it's a CLI tool, right? It's not a solution. It's a tool that you use. The Flux, for instance, uses Helm, and how it uses it doesn't matter, but it uses Helm to deploy things. but Flux itself is a solution to deploy applications. Helm is not. Helm is a tool that you use. You can use it actively through CLI or through a different tool, you know. So that's where I kind of want to distinguish between that.
I think that's a great idea. I mean, I think it's because to stay out of trouble, I think we have to have Helm in this discussion somewhere because so many people use it. But I think calling it out as a tool that's a CLI tool that is oftentimes part of the solution of any of these. I know, you know, Spinnaker probably could refer to it. I mean, it can be called in many different ways. So I think we have to address it somewhere.
Yeah, and just the reason why I think it's special is because while it is a CLI tool, when Flux uses it, it's an operator, which I think is relevant. And then also it does have workflow features, which kind of fits similar to what Argo does, right? It has lifecycle hooks. So it's not, to me, it's not obviously excluded. So if it's not, doesn't make sense in here, that it should be explained why. That was my only point. Thanks.
I think to maybe just shed some light, it might help, is I think anything that people feel passionate about and that is relevant in the landscape should be in here. So I don't think there's any point in excluding something. But what I will do is I think we can probably rework these sections to be a little bit more sympathetic to behaviors, and then maybe it would make sense for either us to write a little bit about Helm or to not. So
I think
we can definitely make sure. Okay, cool. Thank you. Thanks everyone. That was really great input. We don't need to go too much through this. This is just a little stanza around sort of why we think it matches the charter. Please feel free to comment on it. I think what's pretty more important and that we can spend the rest of our time on is the working mode and the goals and non-goals. So I'll quickly go through the working mode. This is primarily going to be expressed through the goals. The team will do the standard kind of formats and rituals, but the things that we're interested in doing first and foremost are vendor and end user interviews, and focusing these questions on understanding what are the patterns of success so that we can identify a set of behaviors that are helping folks to deploy applications and infrastructure, and more importantly, where are those pain points. Secondarily to that, and this is sort of a incremental list here, it's not parallel, capturing the current practice of the landscape radar. And again, I would invite some comments on this in a moment, because I know that this can be a very, very broad net to cast. And then provide interoperability examples, right? So this again comes back to, we like to use Potato. And so if you're not familiar with that, you know, it's a CNCF project, which has some example code, microservices. I think was it Litmus team who helped to give some more examples in there recently?
Yeah,
Yes,
Litmus provided the distributed version.
Yeah, so, and in fact, I will actually add this. I'll put, and I want to mention it directly, that Potato, because it gives a bit of relevance as well, because that's an existing project that it's not something we have to create. It's something we can just go and reference to. Give end users ideas and examples, so that'll be in that repository. This one came out of last meeting because I believe that we had some discussion around who is the persona for all this stuff. So it's in this as a sub point, but actually I think ultimately it's a goal for all of these points, is that the key stakeholder should be potentially someone who has a CKA or equivocal as an engineer who's interested in this cloud native world. And that comes perhaps to your question earlier on around what's the baseline for this stuff. So if I just, I'm going to add this as a suggestion to put that in at the top here, just so we have that as kind of a North Star to where we're going with all this. And then the last part of this, if we successfully achieve these 3 points, is to provide a successful patterns white paper in a similar vein to the operator white paper. So we clear up some of the taxonomy, we identify some of the popular tooling, we look at some of the examples, and we perhaps see what other things have come out of the end user interview. So that's my piece on the goals. I would like to open it up if anyone wants to comment on it, have some discussion.
Looking good.
Cool.
I think that as this matures, getting this, I think this first cutout, this first draft is super critical. But I think as it matures, we really have to start thinking about microservice architecture. That I think the third bullet point you had in there.
Yeah.
Because it does change. I mean, when we think about, like, if you look at your Venn diagram there with the application in the center, oftentimes we still think of an application as being as big as, you know, if we're a bank, we have a teller application and it kind of looks like a big, you know, it's going to have a square like Kepton, you know, or Argo CD. But it's in a microservice architecture, that stuff just changes so much. We're talking about moving little things across the pipeline on a high frequency basis and deploying them all day long. It does offer some new challenges. And I don't know if anybody else has been reached out to, but Paulo Simoes, he
I know him.
wants, he wants to start a microservices working group. And I almost feel like it may be something that should be taken on after this draft comes out, that this application enablement should have a microservices kind of area or focus, because it is going to change the way we see things.
Happy to.
We went through
happy...
I was going to say, we went through a data model exercise at my company, and the hardest thing we had to figure out in the data model, because it needed to be concrete, is figuring out, and we have actually something like 300 applications. So the term app is very specific for us because it's a chart. And once you figure that out, then you could figure out how it's composed from a data model. But the thing about microservice, we had a hard time figuring out how you define a microservice. In other words, like, how do you in a data model represent it? Because we have applications that share a database, and that's kind of not our pattern. But in some cases, you could draw a big box around that whole thing and call it a microservice. Anyway, so that was one of the things that, you know, we're talking about microservices here, but unless we kind of can represent it in some sort of a data model, we could look at the same thing and call it different things. Anyway, so that would be good for people if you're going to have a group like this. And again, data model is important. You know, figuring out how you define that would be because that would at least bound your problem statement. So
yeah, I mean, everybody has questions on how to, you know, create a microservice architecture, how the domains should look, what the layers should be. So that's why it would be of service to the broader community to start having a conversation somewhere on the on microservices. And I feel like, potentially, instead of creating a new working group, while a working group would be good to have a focus on it, it could also be added to you know, version 2 of this document.
Absolutely. I think those are both good points.
One comment. How do you pronounce your name? Sohail? Sorry if I get this wrong.
yeah, Sohail, that's perfect.
Okay,
Yep.
That's fine. Would you be willing to share in one of the upcoming meetings that data model? Would that be possible? I think that group here is also very interested in this.
Okay, yeah, sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just add it to the upcoming presentation when it's convenient for you, but I think it would be interesting because I think it helps to connect some people here and share some more opinions on this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure.
It would be amazing, I think.
That's great. Thank you so much. So I think, and just to sort of maybe give a final thought on the microservice architectures piece, regardless of your opinion on it, what's important is that it's prevalent in the landscape. And it's a problem area that folks are trying to solve for, you know, whether that's you've got 50 Spring Boot applications that all talk RPC to each other with 10 databases, or whether you're a bedroom developer, it's something that I think we're seeing a lot, and it's gaining traction. So I would just like to use the last few moments to talk about the non-goals. And if anybody feels strongly about this, and I think there's something we do need to have, because we're not trying to boil the ocean here, and we don't want to run the risk of the working group becoming too broad and too thin. So does anybody have anything they feel like would be a good start to put as a non-goal here? And I'll start with one, actually. It's not to create a spec. We're not looking to, at this point in time, at least, we're not looking to create a new type of CRD that defines infrastructure and applications.
I think like we are not provisioning any clusters as non-goals. Not provisioning any Kubernetes cluster.
So you think we should essentially assume that the cluster exists?
Yeah.
Okay. the only reason I wonder about that is because that is a big part of the infrastructure piece of the puzzle. Because not everybody starts from a phase where the cluster exists already. So to give you an example, at Amex or at JP, you would tend to spin up a cluster in a development environment, deploy something, tear it down again. So that was quite an okay thing to do. And I think about K3's clusters, for example. So we could start with that common denominator. If you could elaborate why you think that'd be a good place to start, then I'd definitely be happy to sort of think about it. We could put it to the rest of the folks in the call. But I think it could be kind of a big part of this, is because that's a typical operation, is that you would start clusters up and add things like ingress and databases.
I think the question here we need to ask us back to Hang Chao's comment here is, how big do we want to make the problem scope? I think there's already a lot there. And if we say, well, let's assume that the cluster is there for us to get started, then it is helpful. So a non-goal could also be, we consider this for a future version, but unless you think it's like everybody thinks it's like so super important, if we don't discuss it at all, then it might be an issue. I think it's just defining the baby steps. Where can we have, like, with the resources we have available to work on something, have the biggest impact, and what do we leave on the side for the time being?
I think you're right.
Always
Actually,
redo the charter and say, well, and now we start to work on this.
I think you're both right. Actually, when you think about it, if you add in the complexities and the permutations of deploying, say, a Kubernetes cluster, it's incredible. So I think you're absolutely right. So if everyone's in agreement, we'll say that we're not going to look to identify every time an organization builds a container platform, but we'll assume that's kind of a given. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, we can make that statement. We know that this is a problem, but we're leaving it out of the initial round, which we're doing here. My comment, I would still, I think we eventually, to Tracy's point, I think we will be talking microservices here anyways. I mean, once we name something cloud native, we have the CNCF definition of cloud native, which is composable components, frequent deployments. These things we would have in there. I would still say we don't tell people how to architect their applications.
Yeah.
We don't tell you how to best build a microservices architecture. So Tracy, to your point, I think we should consider obviously these type of applications are built in a microservices way, but we're not telling people how to best build their apps.
Right.
Because that takes us into
we
domain
talking
modeling in a lot of directions.
I'm just wondering if we are, because are we going to encourage decoupling between these infrastructure components and the app, or that's what you're saying? No, not necessarily.
I think to the extent that we want to give best practices for how to coordinate the process. In fact, in the non-goals, I would say one thing that we should be clear is that we are not defining how deployments should be done.
No, absolutely. Let's just reiterate this. In all of the goals of this working group, it is collect data, analyze data, provide some examples of the patterns that we've seen. So that could be some examples of Ortelius or Kepton or Flux or Terraform, and then provide successful patterns. Now, this is an opinionated word. We can change that, but we could just say provide patterns within a white paper that show what the community are doing at large and how those patterns are working. At no point are we trying to be opinionated or go through that whole king-making process of saying one tool is better than another.
Exactly. I would take the word successful out because it is ambiguous, and so many patterns. You can't have just 2 or 3 patterns for everybody. It's just.
Yeah, I'll change successful there, and how the community has found success with them. Do you think that's a more fair way of doing it, or how end users have found?
I just think how end users are implementing it, because there's so many different kinds of requirements that there's never going to be. It's like trying to come up with a standard CI/CD pipeline. It's impossible.
Yeah.
But I would definitely put in there, just to really clarify, is that we are not. I would like to see in the non-goals that we're not defining how deployments should be done. This is not a paper about how to do a best practice around deployments.
This is true, yes.
It needs to be clear that this is this is a document on patterns for coordinating infrastructure and application releases. You know, it's not about, is GitOps better than Spinnaker, for example?
No, absolutely. I mean, and I think that was part of the very, very intentional bucketing of application delivery and infrastructure provisioning as the two halves of this, because we don't want to start getting into the weeds about which tool is better than another and how we're defining the behaviors as being successful versus unsuccessful. So yeah, there's that's our initial list. So we're not defining a new type of standard. We're not building Kubernetes from scratch. Sorry, we're not. I'm going to rephrase that. We will assume we're not. We will assume that Kubernetes is built from already built. Assume already utilizing container platform. This is not an opinion on how to build microservice applications or cloud native architecture. We're not telling people how to best build their apps and infrastructure, and we're not defining how deployments are done anymore at this point.
Just for
because this is good.
But we just put in for completeness. Usually, it's also not the goal to create a new CNCF open source project. So the goal is also not to create a new project here. This oftentimes just comes up in a discussion. Do you then want to create a new application enablement project? No, we don't want to. It is implicitly already in there. Just from the past, it's useful to have it explicitly mentioned as well, because this keeps coming up.
And we're at the end of the hour, top of the hour, and I see that we have a new suggestion in the proposed name list. Composable cloud, and I presume that's cloud native. I like cloud native as well.
I was writing cloud native quite frequently. I don't know why. This is like a Freudian thing for me right now. I don't know.
I think it is. Maybe it's a little bit. I like it. I think it sounds good. It's about what folks find the most relatable and doesn't confuse them. I think application enablement was the best of a bad bunch. We are definitely open to changing it. I don't know the best way to do it, whether it's to take a vote at some point, but yeah, that's a very good name. I think it's fairly clear. I like platforms rather than defining it just as application workload or application enablement. Any more thoughts?
I like composable. I mean, something that talks about putting things together, right?
It's a very long name.
Maybe cloud native Legos.
So this name I actually stole from everywhere. That's how we ended up there. Stole composable from Alex because he mentioned composability of different things. Hong Zhao indirectly mentioned it as well because he wanted to use services. Cloud native is obviously where I stole this from. App is because this is app delivery. And platforms, there is a very good platform and application platforms blog post from Gartner. And don't get me, this is Gartner, because that blog post is actually good. It's actually a good read what companies are challenged with. I'll share it on the mailing list to make up your mind. And I just put everything in there that the thing might be, where they're building the platform to ship their applications or to get their applications out there. So it's more or less stealing everything that, or reusing everything that usually was coming my way. Not saying that this is what we have to be using, but this is how it came about this.
So
pleasing everybody.
How I would spin off of composable, I think I would probably call it something like cooperative delivery.
Cooperative delivery.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I kind of love it. I mean, there's a permutation of that, of course, in the composable delivery working group. But yeah, I think that's great, Tracy. That's a really good name. Yeah, I mean, I really like that actually. I don't know. Do we have to decide this moment?
I feel like that's what we're trying to do, is create a way to coordinate two very difficult pieces of the puzzle, the infrastructure and manage the application. And it is really a cooperation between the development teams and the infrastructure team. So, and I think composable kind of gives the idea of the configuration aspects. But I think if we want to get the idea across about putting these two together, that's why I would shift it to cooperative.
I think that's great. I tell you what, if you folks wouldn't mind, like if you get time, just do a +1 on what the names you think make the most sense. That's probably the best way to do this, right? And we can review it and tally it up. But that's a great suggestion. Is that okay for us to do that?
Yes.
Cool. Well, I've reached the end of the presentation. I think it's back to our chair.
Yeah, I think that was a good working meeting. So I would keep this in this meeting. I mean, we'll have other presentations obviously as well, but I think it's for the time being, we don't need a separate one until we dive deeper into actual deliverables here. I'd encourage everybody to share it with as many people we can. So especially also other projects. I think that this is, I think that usually the big success is that, and what we also should try to do as a tag, involve the other projects that we are working with. That are under CNCF App Delivery. It's not really under because, well, they're independent projects obviously, but trying to get them actively involved in what they're working on this. So maybe a quick round of reviews then, and trying to reach out. I mean, many of us know other projects where this would make sense, and again, feel free to also get people involved of projects that are not CNCF projects. I also want to bring this up again. You don't have to be a CNCF project, obviously, to contribute here and to have an opinion and to work on it. We even have projects presenting for those who just recently joined that are not CNCF projects as well. And that's totally fine. It should be an open community. But I would assume if I'm a CNCF project that kind of falls under the umbrella of CNCF App Delivery, that somebody will tell me that this thing exists and that they can have an opinion on it. Like the usual suspects.
Yeah. So, Alois, if you're okay, I would just like to take a minute to provide a quick update on the work that.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, we totally forgot about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So for those of you who are not aware, sometime before KubeCon, when we were talking about generally chaos engineering trends, it appears that there are multiple projects, at least 2 inside CNCF, which have been working with a large community, and it is worthwhile to put together the learnings into a white paper. That's what suggested by Alois. I liked it very much, and we approached the other project, Chaos Mesh. They were very happy to coordinate, and interestingly, one more project also joined, Chaos Blade. So all 3 projects are working together to put together the learnings from the community. And we had a couple of meetings, really KubeCon and few other stuff came in the way. And I think, we all geared up to start working on that and get something that is reviewable, both in this tag and I think the other projects are in the networking tag. So security will be one small piece of that white paper. And I'm very happy to coordinate the charter with all the other 3 tags specifically on security chaos as well. So that's really the update. We did meet, that's a success. We have not made a lot of observations written, though we just talked about it. We hope to find something useful in the next 2 weeks, right? So that's really the update. Yeah, any comments, Alois, or any suggestions? It's really the back-end work that's going on. You're on mute.
I am on mute, so it keeps happening to me. I think it's great. Maybe for the next meeting, we take a bit more time to also talk about the Chaos project. And I think you've seen what we want to do with the charter.
Yeah.
Maybe ensure that we get like all the involved parties together, that they also have that working group.
Sure. Yeah, I'll come prepared for next meeting. I'll put some agenda together and we talk about the efforts in the next meeting. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's great that we're making progress there, and that's also how it should be. When we started with the trends at KubeCon, and now moving this forward here, I think is great.
Yep. Awesome. And thank you for all the support. Yeah.
Yeah. And for the charter again, if you need any help, we'll try to reach out.
Sure. I will do that. Thank you.
As well. And All right, we are over. We had so much stuff to talk about. I think that's
We had so much fun. It was
Cooperated.
great. Yeah, it was great. Exactly. We cooperated. All right.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. I have to run to another
Thank you.
meeting.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks.
thanks
y'all.
everyone. We'll
Bye.
back again in 2 weeks from now.